Welcome to this traffic safety webinar sponsored by the North Carolina Governor's Highway Safety Program. This is one in a series of webinars addressing topics of interest for traffic safety professionals. The series is co-hosted by the Institute for Transportation Research and Education at NC State University and the University of North Carolina Highway Safety Research Center. Today's topic is crash data and traffic safety, the importance of details in the DMV 349. Our presenters are Angela Berry and Daniel Carter. Angela is the Traffic Safety Section Manager for the Charlotte Department of Transportation. She's a North Carolina registered professional civil engineer with 30 years of experience. Ms. Berry specializes in traffic safety and intelligent transportation systems, as well as construction activities, including traffic signal systems, temporary traffic control, and light rail systems. She has extensive experience using independent judgment in her work, as well as interacting with many internal and external customers. And Ms. Berry enjoys mentoring young engineers and staff via mock interviews. Daniel is a traffic safety project engineer and data wrangler with the North Carolina Department of Transportation. He serves in the safety planning group, where he uses safety analysis methods to inform NCDOT project priorities and alternatives. His focus areas are in crash data, roadway data, and integrating these data together in a spatial environment for safety analysis. Prior to joining the NCDOT, Daniel was a senior research associate at the UNC Highway Safety Research Center. So welcome to Angela and Daniel. And Angela, if you will share your screen and begin the presentation.
Hello, everybody. Give me just 1 second. I'm used to working in a completely different platform. There we go. So thank you for having me. I really enjoyed this opportunity. I'm looking forward to sharing sort of what I've been doing here in Charlotte, and then I'm looking forward to hearing from Daniel about how things work at the state level here in North Carolina. So I'm going to go through the slides that I teach at our basic law enforcement training class. So there's a 3-day portion of the basic law enforcement training that is all about crash reporting, filling out the DMV 349, legalities, all of that good stuff, and sort of about a self-preservation, if you will. I volunteered to teach about an hour at this class every semester. I'm not going to give you the full hour today because part of it is one of our technicians speaking as well. So with that, I'm going to talk about how we use data at CDOT and the different ways that it's important to us. Some details of the DMV 349 here in North Carolina that are very helpful for us. Tips on things you may not have thought of that may be useful to you in the field, especially if you're with law enforcement writing up the DMV 349, some successes we've had here in Charlotte, and then normally I would hold questions right after my talk, but we'll wait until Daniel's done. So these are all the different ways we use crash data at Charlotte DOT. Everything from addressing signal requests to our pedestrian crossing committee. Sometimes we have media and attorney inquiries. We have a high injury network that we created under our Vision Zero program. We have a couple of standing committees, our pedestrian crossing committee and our transportation safety committee, that look at specific requests or specific issues that arise when we're looking at the data. And then we also are the only municipality that shares our data with the Highway Safety Information System. All the other organizations that share their crash data with HSIS are state level DOTs. And that has to do with the volume of data that we have. So we have over 12 years worth of data, as well as just how good it is in terms of detail. So I wanted to share a little bit about the DMV 349. So this comes to CDOT as the primary street, if you fill out the field on the left, and it comes to CDOT as the intersecting street on the field on the right on the DMV 349. And this is important. What's more important though is your crash diagram. And so this came to us as Wilkinson at Newberry Street. But if you look at the crash diagram, you can see that clearly this was somebody navigating out of the private vehicle area to the north and trying to get over into that left turn lane. And so we were able to geolocate this crash appropriately instead of locating it at the intersection of Wilkinson and Newberry. I have one request if you are in law enforcement. Please, oh please, oh please, draw your north arrow up. This is the same intersection drawn 4 different ways. The arrow down, the arrow left, the arrow right, and finally the arrow up. This makes it so much easier on us as engineers when we're analyzing your crash diagrams. We have some unique geometry here in Charlotte. So for instance, this is the intersection of 485 with Mount Holly Road. If you look at it in the middle and then look at the outer ramp to the left and the inner ramp to the right, you'll see that both are geometrically absolutely identical. They are signalized. There is nothing geometrically to differentiate them when you draw your crash diagram. And so that becomes important when we get crash diagrams that look like the following, where it just says to I-485 at Mount Holly Road, or the 485 on or off ramp at Mount Holly Road. Well, here's what happens. My engineer who geolocates all these crashes for me makes a guess. He either guesses based on the narrative or he makes a coin toss guess and assigns the crash to one of those 2 locations. So that makes it really hard, particularly at this location, to analyze for crash patterns. This is an officer who filled out the crash report and did a great job of labeling that it was the inner on-ramp and the inner off-ramp so that we knew which signalized location to put it at. My only negative comment on this in particular would be that the north arrow is pointing down. Your narrative details are so important. They make such a difference when we are analyzing crashes. The more detail we can glean from what the officer obtained from the drivers and witnesses, the better we have opportunity to make decisions about where to spend our capital dollars on projects to improve traffic safety. We have a definition here in Charlotte that if it's within 100 feet of the signalized intersection, we code it to the intersection. However, if you look at this crash diagram, you can clearly see that on the right-hand side, this is at a median break, and we might have miscoded this to the intersection of Wilkinson and Fairhaven without the crash diagram being so accurately drawn. This is another challenge that we face sometimes, and I'm sure Daniel can attest to this. This says 5th and Church Street. However, the crash diagram says 5th somewhere in the vicinity of College Street. Those are both one-way, it's a one-way pair, and they don't intersect. So again, we had to just guess. We probably defaulted to the crash diagram. I'm not sure, to be honest with you. This is my only slide with a lot of words on it. And my apologies for this, but I think it's very important, especially in a city where we are trying to eliminate fatal and serious injury crashes, which is the K and A type crashes. These definitions become really important. And I know some of them, some A's, you might code as a B or C. And it doesn't turn out to be an A until the individual goes to the hospital later and we discover via some other method at the hospital that there's massive internal bleeding or other injury that wasn't clearly obvious to the officer on scene. I apologize. This is my second slide with many words. Angle type is very important. So that's boxes 10 and 11 on the DMV 349. These are all angle type crashes. Left turn, different roadway, left turn, same roadway, same for the two right turning movements. A true angle crash is when two intersections are going straight on intersecting roads and neither vehicle is making a turning movement. That is a true angle crash. Some tips: lane lines can be your friend. So skipped lane lines, generally speaking, are marked 30 feet apart and each skip is 10 feet. So if you count 4 skips times 40 feet, that's 160 feet. So you can fill that in on your crash diagram as well. This is an intersection where without the detailed crash diagram, we might have coded this to Woodlawn and Park Road, which is a signalized intersection that's nearby. But this officer did a great job of labeling the Chick-fil-A, the private vehicle areas, and other addresses so that we could geolocate this correctly. Again, we have some unusual geometry here in Charlotte. So we have 2 places where Ballantyne Corporate Place intersects Ballantyne Commons Parkway. This is not infrequent here in Charlotte, where we have multiple streets that loop and intersect the same common street. So landmarks in this case are really important in that crash diagram. Some successes. So this was an intersection that had recently opened. It's been open for quite a while now, but was opened unsignalized. And an officer brought it to our safety committee and said, I go to a crash here every time I'm on patrol, at least once during my patrol shift, if not more. And sure enough, we pulled the crashes and there was a left turn, different roadway crash pattern, and resulted in us identifying a need for a signal, justifying the need for a signal, and installing a full mast arm signal since this is in our university area. This also included acquisition of real estate from a Walmart, which, as you might imagine, is no easy feat. Another success was our CMPD colleagues bringing to our attention a string of fatalities along South Tryon here in Charlotte, which is also known as Route 49. And that this road was very dark and unlit with streetlights. And so we funded a street lighting project with Duke Energy and have lit all the way down to Carowinds Boulevard. And we are now working our way south of Carowinds Boulevard, I believe down to the city limit line. And so that is all I have. And I will turn it back over to Eugene.
Angela, thank you very much. All right, Dan, you can go ahead and share your slides and continue.
All right, give me just a second to get all that arranged. All right. I think the correct screen is showing.
Yes.
You see the title slide?
Yes, sir.
Okay, great. Well, appreciate the chance to talk to you all today. I'm going to kind of follow on with what Angela said, and I know that we've got a lot of law enforcement attending the webinar. It's great. Y'all are actually who I want to really focus on. I hope this is interesting to other parties as well, but I really want to talk to law enforcement. So I work in NCDOT in a traffic safety unit. We do crash data. We do safety work all day, every day. This is what we're focused on here. So I wanted to, first I want to advance the slide. I wanted to just give you a sense or a little peek into how we're using crash data, particularly that you and the law enforcement community are collecting for this kind of purpose. And then I want to really focus down on crash location and kind of follow on to some things that Angela said and talk about some of the issues there and why that's so important. So to give you a kind of a view into what we do in a very basic flow, we are taking crash data, and that's coming from all the law enforcement agencies around the state. And we are looking at that crash data, analyzing it so that we can identify what we call potentially hazardous locations. And so on the right is just a little example there, so just a shot of the map around Wilmington with some of the sections of road highlighted. And these are ones that we identified based on the crash, the amount of crashes happening, the patterns of the crashes happening as being sections of road that we need to look more closely into, because these are showing up with crashes more than they would be expected to have, or some patterns or something like that. What we'll do next then is we have a number of field offices, and we have field engineers who will go out to these places, these sites that we identified. As you see here, they might visit, let's say, a curve where some crashes are happening. They'll drive that, they'll check it out, look and see what kind of sight distance is available, what condition is the pavement, what's lighting like, all these kinds of field conditions, and see if they can determine what might be a problem out there. Following that, they'll make some kind of recommendation about how the road should be improved to try to address that crash pattern that called the attention. So this could be a number of things. It really depends on what the crash pattern was. Top left, it could be a rumble stripe going through that area. On the top right, it could be some retroreflective raised pavement markers to kind of show the curve more clearly at night if it's maybe a nighttime crash issue. Or down the bottom could be some other improvements, putting up what we call the chevron sign, that yellow and black sign, or simply, as these guys here are doing, kind of just refreshing the edge line there, that white edge line, to kind of make that more visible too. So we have a number of different things we might do out there. And then finally, once these recommendations are made, we'll fund and install projects at these various areas. And we track and see, you know, how well did it treat the problem that we saw. So here in this example, the top shows a particular section where there was this kind of double curve, curving right, then curving left. It was a pretty windy road. And this gives you an idea of how we look at crashes. We will commonly make this kind of collision diagram that shows there with the little squiggly arrows that we see a real pattern of these runoff road crashes. That's what the squiggly arrow means, happening on that curve. And that's why we were looking at the site in the first place. After this curve was addressed, and in fact, it was actually straightened out. So these curves were kind of downplayed to make them gentler curves. The after period that we looked at really took care of that crash issue, one runoff road crash there, but really addressed that pattern. So this is just a real quick overview of, you know, kind of how are we using that crash data? What are we doing with it? And you can tell it leads to real world improvements that we're doing. And as I kind of implied in some of the language about the webinar coming up, you know, how we spend millions of dollars based on crash data. So it all comes back to, you know, this crash data and using it to identify the places, identify the problems, and that sort of thing. And of course, crash data all starts here. It starts with officers reporting the scene of the crash, recording the information so that we can then work from that. So I just kind of wanted to dial back to this is where it's coming from. And I will go ahead and admit that probably the fellow on the left, I don't think he's actually from Pineville. He's probably a stand-in actor for a shot. Fellow on the top right, definitely not filling out a crash report form. And the guy on the bottom is a Vermont State Trooper. There weren't a lot of shots of you guys filling out crash report forms, so cut me some slack. I wanted to illustrate a little bit. Let's talk a little bit about the crash data and some of the ways that we get into using that, particularly the crash location. I want to talk a bit about this because it's a very important thing. And when I look at it, I really see a lot of parallels between what we're doing on the engineering side of the house and how law enforcement would use this data. You know, we're both identifying problem areas, like I just mentioned. We're both identifying patterns in the crash data. But when we get to step 3, what are we going to do? We have different levers that we pull. We're looking at ways to improve the road, some of those examples I just showed. Whereas law enforcement's looking at, where should patrols be deployed, or higher, high intensity enforcement, that sort of thing. So crash location is a very important issue. I think we can kind of see that. And when we talk about how is it done, Angela gave us a good preview here. This is the piece showing here of the DMV 349 crash report form. We can see here this particular crash in Durham was recorded as occurring on Martin Luther King Jr. Parkway. The distance amount was 100 feet east from Old Chapel Hill Road toward Dixon Road. So we kind of have all these pieces of information that tell us where the crash occurred. And here at NCDOT, we've got a system that can take these road names and the distance and the direction and actually map it, virtually sort of map where the crash occurred, and to kind of illustrate what that looks like. For example, here for this particular crash, the system, we kind of have a network of the roads built into the system. And you can say, okay, I recognize Martin Luther King Parkway here. The crash is on this road. I recognize Old Chapel Hill Road. That's this intersection here on the left. And it can say, okay, 100 feet east from that intersection is where the crash occurred. And the system will then know that that crash occurred at that point. And just a little peek behind the scenes, the way we actually record that information is that every route in the state has a numeric code. You see it there with the 4000 and such. That's the code for Martin Luther King Parkway in Durham. And then we record the crash's position with this numeric value of what we call the milepost, which is just a measurement along the road of where the crash occurred, starting from 0 and kind of working down the road. So that if the crash got a milepost, then the system knows where the crash occurred. And then we can use that in our analysis. However, this doesn't always work very well. About 20% of the time, our system can't put a milepost on a crash for a number of reasons, and I'll highlight a few. But you can kind of see this is not a small problem. When we go to do analysis, we're trying to identify sites with problems. Not knowing where 20% of the crash is occurring is a pretty stiff problem to overcome. A lot of times, if we're interested in a specific location, we're actually going to spend a lot of time going through, like what Angela showed, the narrative, the sketch, and other things to see if we can determine where these particular crashes occurred at one point. So just to kind of peel back here and talk a little bit about why is the crash location a difficult thing? Why can't the system do it for 20% of the crashes? Sometimes it's just simply an inability to locate the crash. The system cannot figure out where the crash occurred. It could be that it was a wrong street name that was recorded, just sort of accidentally by the officer, wrote down the wrong street name. For Angela's example, putting church down instead of college, that kind of thing can happen. Some other issues, though, are a little bit more devious because it's hard to know that these would actually be problems. And I'm showing an example on the bottom left there, where off of Martin Luther King Parkway, we've got this just little neighborhood road kind of coming off of Martin Luther King, going around and coming back into it. Angela showed this, another example in Charlotte, just like this. And of course, the problem is if the indication on the crash report form is that the crash occurred on Martin Luther King at, or let's say 100 feet east of Glidewell, which is the name of that little road, that is actually two places. It would be just to the right here and just to the right there. And so the system can get confused and just says, I don't know where this crash occurred. So that's part of that 20% problem. Another example would be when we have an interchange. For example, here on the bottom right, I'm showing the interchange of I-40 and Gorman Street in South Raleigh. And the way that our system works is, let's say the crash occurred at the ramp intersection right at the north side of this interchange here. The officer would say this crash occurred on the I-40 westbound exit ramp at Gorman Street. Our system can't handle the complexities of eastbound, off-ramp, and so it sort of sees it as being I-40 at Gorman Street. That's kind of how it gets simplified too. Well, I-40 at Gorman Street is actually right here where the overpass bridge is. And so when we deal with interchanges, we have a lot of crashes virtually occurring at the center of that bridge and not up at the northern ramp intersection or the southern ramp intersection, depending on where it actually occurred. So these are just a couple examples of where we have problems even getting a crash located down to a map where we can see. Another issue we run into is sometimes the system can come up with a location, but it's not the right one. And this could be a number of issues. Sometimes it's a distance with a problem with the distance. We run into this more in rural areas where you have, a long stretch of a rural 2-lane road, and the officer says that this, or trooper, I guess in this case, indicates that this crash occurred, let's say 0.5 miles from some nearby intersection. That very well is possibly an approximated distance, and it's not exactly 0.5 miles. And that gives us a bit of a difficulty determining exactly where did the crash occur. For example, which curve did it occur in? Because sometimes our curves are very different. So we have some issues with this. Sometimes directions can be recorded inaccurately, putting the crash on one side of the intersection when it actually occurred on the other side, that kind of thing. Or in the case I'm showing here in the photo, in Chocowinity, where US 17 eventually got a bypass around the town. And so if an officer records the crash as occurring on US 17, but what they actually meant was the US 17 going through the town, which in our system is called business 17, then the crash will get a milepost way over here on the bypass. It will get sort of placed virtually on the bypass when that's not actually where it occurred. So we have all of these issues with locations kind of swirling around, and that's what really results in our issues with that 20% that I highlighted before. One more thing I want to highlight, especially for the law enforcement, is I've had a number of conversations with crime analysts in various law enforcement departments over the past year or so. Come to find out, a lot of crime analysts are trying to do crash mapping as well. Maybe the chief has requested a map of a certain kind of crash, or 3 years worth of crash data, or that sort of thing. And this is a real difficulty for the crime analysts in a lot of cases. And a lot of times they're going through it in a very manual way. They're kind of going crash by crash, looking at the report, figuring out where it occurred, and putting a point on a map, and kind of working through hundreds of crashes that way. So it's a difficulty for these folks as well. Thankfully, we've got kind of a small but growing trend going on in the state, which is assigning lat-long coordinates, geospatial coordinates, to crashes. And I'm speaking of coordinates being gathered by the officer on the scene. As I'm showing there in the illustration, 2 numbers, 35 dot something and -77 dot something, that kind of idea. Raleigh's been doing this for a number of years. Other towns, I've kind of listed a few of the ones there that are doing it pretty much fully: Fuquay Varina, Conover, Boone. And so these agencies are collecting coordinates on the scene, which is enormously helpful for some of the problems I've highlighted here. So I want to just really kind of break down what is the advantage of an officer collected lat-long crash coordinate. So if you have an officer who collects the crash coordinate where that crash occurred, gives the lat-long on their crash report form, that's going to eliminate a lot of those locating issues that I just talked through. It's really going to knock a whole lot of those out. It's quick to collect, and I'm going to show that in a second. You can do it in under a minute. It's quick to do. It's easy to collect. There are a number of ways to do, but I've got a really good map tool. It's a website that you can go to that we developed simply for law enforcement to do this kind of thing, and I'll demonstrate that. And then it's going to enable both crime analysts and engineers to be able to quickly create these accurate crash maps, to do it quickly, but also have good locations of where the crashes occurred. And then kind of the overall point is, the officer on the scene has the best knowledge of where the crash occurred. I mean, we can go through, as Angela's staff is going through crashes later on, looking at the diagram, reading the narrative. They can do a lot of good guesswork, maybe based on having the Chick-fil-A and the diagram. Sometimes they just have to simply guess, like she said, more coin toss. But that officer on the scene knows exactly where that crash happened, and the information they give via that lat-long coordinate is enormously valuable, and no one else can do that. So how easy is it? I said it's easy. I said it's quick. We've got a web page for this purpose, and I'm going to ask Eugene, if you wouldn't mind, on the side, if you could take that URL and plop that into the chat, just so that everyone would have access to it. I'm going to go on and actually show a demonstration of what that would look like. So let's say that you're going through, doing your crash report form on the scene, get everyone secured and safe and everything. You're kind of now recording the details of the crash. I'm showing an eCrash software here. I know various agencies use different ones, but most of them, you would have this kind of setup where, if you see here in the kind of lower portion, there's going to be a box for latitude, box for longitude. That's kind of the basic setup here, right? So how do you get those? I want to highlight one way that's going to be, I think, the easiest way to go about this. We've got a web tool. That's the URL I just showed. This web page here, where you can go and get the lat-long very easily. So, for example, let's say that I was at that I-40 in Gorman. Type it in here. That interchange I showed earlier. You can either scroll down and find where you're at or type it in and go there, just kind of the same as using Google Maps. And then click where the crash occurred. So if that crash did occur up here at this northern ramp terminal intersection, maybe even right where that channelized turn lane comes in, if that's where the crash occurred, I'm going to click right there. And that lat long is going to appear just onto the right. And the one aspect I'd like to highlight here about this particular tool is there's a copy button next to each one of these numbers. You don't have to drag, select, and copy. You can just hit copy next to the latitude, come on back over to your crash report form, and right click to paste, or hit Control V to paste. Pop it in, come back to longitude, copy, come back to crash report form, paste, and you're done. So pretty quick. Find yourself on the map, click, copy the two values in, keep moving through the crash report form. But what you've done is get some very, very valuable information for that crash that, you know, Angela or I or someone else maybe in the department could use. Here are the slides that I was going to show in case something didn't work. So these are just screenshots of what I just showed. So these will be embedded in the PowerPoint if that's shared later on. So does it make a difference? I want to give a couple examples to show you what this looks like. On the left here, this is a little zoom in piece of Conover. And on the left is the crashes that if I map only using the road names and the distance that was recorded, the crash map looks like that with the black dots. We can see kind of where those are occurring. But it's not all of them. In fact, in Conover, it was a fairly low percentage. However, Conover was collecting coordinates on their crashes consistently for all their crashes, just a practice they instituted a couple of years ago. And so if we use the coordinates to map the crashes, we get what's on the right side. And we can see very clearly now where those crashes are occurring in the clustering. We can see really up and down kind of this section of the road here. Crashes are occurring there, and we weren't able to see those before because the system couldn't figure out where they were occurring. We see a cluster of crashes at this intersection. So we get a very different view, a very more accurate, more truthful view of what are the crash concerns at this particular area of Conover. One more example I'll show is that interchange that I highlighted. Excuse me, the Gorman Street and I-40 interchange. On the left is just using the road names, just like the original way that I'd showed. And as I mentioned, a lot of the crashes are getting put in that center of the interchange because the system can't put crashes at ramps very accurately at all. On the right, again, Raleigh is one of the agencies that's been collecting crash coordinates. And these are actually where the crashes occurred based on the coordinates collected by the officers. And so now we can see the kind of clustering of crashes that's happening at this northern interchange or northern ramp intersection. The one toward the south, we can see there are some in the middle there. And we get a much better view of where the crashes are occurring, even the ones that are occurring along the ramps themselves. So just a couple examples of the fact that, yeah, this can definitely make a difference. So just to bring it home, if we have officer collected crash coordinates, we have better knowledge of where crashes are occurring, and we can end up making better safety improvements, whether that's improving the road or deploying patrols out there. I appreciate the time to talk to you, and I'll turn it back to Eugene for some Q&A.
Daniel, thank you very much. And just a reminder, if you all open your chat window, you'll see that URL to the website that Daniel was mentioning for the latitude and longitude website from DOT. Let's now answer some questions. We've got a few already in the Q&A. And let me start with just a reminder, you can use the Q&A function. Just click on that, type in your question for Angela and Daniel, or if you'd like to actually ask the question verbally, click the raise your hand icon and I'll call on you and unmute your mic, or I'll activate your microphone for you. Angela, let's start. First question with you. Do you have any strategies that you would like to share regarding obtaining funding for safety needs that you identify? Sometimes it can be challenging moving from data to action.
Yeah, so we're actually fortunate at Charlotte DOT. We use safety data to prioritize everything that we spend our capital dollars on, especially since we became a Vision Zero city, which is a city that's declared that we are working to end fatal and serious injury crashes. Having all of that data mapped has been really key to driving where we prioritize things like sidewalk projects or some of the examples I used, our traffic signals evaluation group uses crash data all the time to evaluate improvements at signals. It can be as simple as time of day running so that there's no flashing yellow arrow, there's only the green arrow for the left turn movement. And they can do that if they have the data in hand to know what time of day crashes are occurring and on what approach. So I guess I'm fortunate. I don't think I have any magic wand answers on how to move from data to projects, because we've always used data here at Charlotte DOT. When I first took over this position, this was a big part of what I do. So it's kind of embedded in me to be safety driven and use the data to move into action. It's how we identify our pedestrian safety projects. It's how we identify roadway improvement projects, signal timing adjustments, safety drives, all of it. Maybe the only thing it doesn't drive is where we put our fiber optic network to communicate with our signals. That might be the only thing it doesn't drive.
Angela, thank you for that. Dan, do you want to add on anything to that before we move on to our next question?
Yeah, I mean, I think very much the way that Charlotte's doing it, data is definitely driving, where locations are identified, like I mentioned, in the overall process, and even down to, between what kind of improvement might we do on the road. We use data to drive that. We look at how much crash reduction would we expect from one particular treatment versus another. So yeah, we're using data all the way through that.
Thank you, Daniel. Looks like we're going to skip over Scott. Scott said to disregard his question, that you actually answered it. So thank you, for Scott, for that.
If you wouldn't, actually, I wouldn't mind taking that one on. He said it's been answered. So Scott, your question was about basically kind of what point to consider to be the crash location. I think when you have something like where someone ran off the road and went maybe, 50 to 100 feet off and hit a tree, where do you put that point of the crash? It's always been my view that, especially from the engineering side, because we're looking at the roadway, we want to know where the person left the roadway. Where did the actual issue occur? It is something that to know where they might have struck that tree, and that's something we could maybe look at if we went to the sketch or the narrative and find that out. But particularly that piece of the road where the incident happened is the important point for us, and I would really push that to be the point that you put down.
Daniel, thank you for adding on to that. Next comment is actually Roger Smock with NCDOT is noting that the DMV 349 on page 97, quote unquote, encourages officers to illustrate an interchange location by drawing an inset location of a crash site within the drawing for interchange locations near entrances, exits, or easily confused locations such as loop roads. And I think Roger has maybe copied and pasted some information from that page. Yeah, you want to add anything to that comment from Roger?
Yeah, I mean, that's great. And definitely, as Angela illustrated, an officer giving a lot of detail in the sketch can be super helpful when trying to determine exactly where the crash happened. Because like the examples I gave, especially with the interchange areas, our system cannot put those crashes accurately, just given, some of these ramps and basically the ramps and the ramp naming structure can't do it. And even with Angela's example, you have the situation where even with a pretty detailed sketch, it was even difficult just because the geometries of those two ramp intersections were so similar. And again, I'm just going to hammer this point. Those lat longs would be super handy if we knew for the Angela's interchange that the point happened at one versus the other. That long would really help distinguish that.
Thank you, Daniel. Next question, is there a correct or incorrect manner to give street names, such as local street names versus the NC or secondary road numerics?
Angela, do you want to give the Charlotte, how y'all are using that? I can talk from the state side.
We take it any way we can get it from you. spelled every different way, road spelled out, road abbreviated, all capitals. Our system doesn't distinguish. I wish I could give you a standard way for everybody to do it, but it would be hard with all the law enforcement we have across the state. We take it any way you can do it. I mean, if you write NC 49 versus South Tryon Street, I'm okay either way.
Basically, same answer from me, that you could write either name of the road if it's 49 and Tryon. So you could put NC 49 as the on road, and our system can understand that. Or you can put Tryon as the on road, and our system can also understand that. And we even try to have some of the common misspellings programmed in, so that if you happen to misspell, switch the R and the Y in Tryon or something like that, that kind of idea, we try to account for that as well. But yeah, as long as it's actually a name of that road, we should be able to handle that, no problem.
Thank you both for that. Let me take a moment to recognize Greg Ferrara. He's had his hand up. Greg, if you will unmute and ask your question or make your comment.
Oh, hey. Hey, everyone. Yeah, thanks, Daniel. Great presentation. Just wanted to kind of address the question or the issue of geolocation for those selected cities or towns that have infilled and used those XY pairs to geolocate their crashes. Is there a method by which those are captured inside of the NCDOT master geolocated database? And if so, could it be then maybe shared back out to the community at large, maybe even send it back to ITRA? And we're sending our infill KNA locations to the NCDOT, but some coming back the other way. And the reason I'm asking that is because there was a topic of this very topic came up at our last NP Zero all hands meeting for folks who are like the city of Greensboro, who want to and are geolocating their crashes manually, not using the XY pairs that you're talking about. Then they wanted to have a sort of a standardized method by which they could use take their crashes and put them back into the NCDOT geo database. So basically just having a sort of seamless way to go both directions for geolocation, both collecting them all and then kind of going back out to the community at large. Is there something that is already in place for that? I just kind of thought of it based on our recent NC Zero all hands meeting question.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, if an officer collects the latitude and longitude on the crash report form, that will go into the state database. So that's absolutely something that goes up to the state. It's not currently a required field. That's why a lot of you in law enforcement who have not been doing that long, you are able to kind of move on past that in the crash report form or the software, that sort of thing. But if you put it in, which obviously I'm asking you, saying this is a hugely beneficial thing for you to do, it will go up there. It'll be something that I can access and others in my unit can access. And yeah, Greg, that can make its way back to ITRI or other parties who might be doing, or Greensboro PD or whoever's doing the geocoding and trying to map the crashes. That'll be available to them then.
Yeah, great. Thank you, Daniel. I'll just connect with you offline. We'll kind of follow up on see if we can get that infilled over here on our NC Zero tools. Thank you.
Absolutely.
Greg, thank you very much for that question and comment. Going back over to our Q&A window here, we've got some responses from Raleigh PD, Timothy Tomzak, noting at Raleigh PD, they use lat long to plot DWI-related traffic crashes to justify checkpoint locations in court. Lat long in large private parking lots also helps identify what might be an issue that a business can address, such as poor traffic markings in a lot, poor lighting, poor line of sight. Think large mall parking lots or large venues like arenas and stadiums. And then the last comment is we use first harmful event location. Angela or Daniel, you want to add to that?
I'll just add that I'm absolutely thrilled with the tool that Daniel's had developed and working really hard to start to implement it here at Charlotte-Mecklenburg Police Department, just for the simple fact that for me, that will free up literally one person full-time who does nothing but geolocate to work on safety-related projects. So I'm looking to pilot it with one of our divisions here. If any of CMPD folks are on the phone and want to pilot it, in your division and think that it's worth giving it a shot. I was going to go with South Division, but I'm open to takers. You can reach me. My email is angela.berry@charlottenc.gov. And you know what? If more than one division wants to pilot it, I'd be happy to have that happen too.
Yeah, that's thank you, Timothy, for kind of talking from the Raleigh perspective. I really I love seeing that kind of thing. I know a number of agencies are using that very data-driven approach, DDAX or something else of that nature, to kind of direct your enforcement efforts, and that's really great to see. I think it's a great parallel with what we're doing here.
Yeah, we actually use it to direct our saturation patrols each week. So our transportation unit takes 2 days of the week and targets the high injury network. So those places where our fatal and serious injury crashes are most likely to occur. And that's where they patrol. It's where they can do the most good, right? Versus the little neighborhood street where somebody's just rolling through a stop sign every now and again. And maybe we have a little fender bender. I'd much rather have officers targeting their enforcement where they have the opportunity to prevent fatal and serious injury crashes.
Thank you both for that. We have a question from the city of Wilmington, probably for Daniel. Of the 20% of unknown locations, has NCDOT been digging into the DMV 349 diagrams and narratives to try to attain the information, or are those crashes just not included in the database and therefore not supporting safety funding?
Yeah. Hey, Dennis, good to see you on here. Great question, and it depends on the scale that we're working at. So if we're looking at some of those statewide views that I showed, where we're kind of looking at all the roads in the state, all the intersections in the state, we're going to have to work off of that 80% because we don't have the person power to go in and look at every crash that didn't get a milepost, didn't get a position. However, if we're looking down at a very specific, maybe an intersection or a curve that we saw, then we actually do go to a lot of work, and kind of what Angela was implying there, a lot of manual work to look at the crash reports and the narratives and sketches of every crash that occurred anywhere in that vicinity, so that we can tell exactly which crashes, try to get that 100%, which crashes occurred at that particular location, because we're looking for things like patterns and that sort of thing. So that's very time consuming, and we have a lot of our staff here in the traffic safety unit that spend the bulk of their time doing that kind of thing. I would love for them to be freed up, as you were saying, Angela, for your staff person, freed up to do other types of work, and not just going into locating crashes that honestly would have been great for that officer to give us the lat long for. So yeah, that's a great question, and this is at the heart of a lot of what we're doing.
Daniel, thank you. Next question: what kind of data is used to install delineators?
I'll let you talk from the city perspective, Angela, if y'all do much of that.
Yeah, boy, that's a tough one. There's so many potential uses for them. And it depends on which kind of delineator you want. So I'm going to speak to maybe we call them quick curb or DuraCurb, where you might want to prevent left turns from a driveway, but there's no median, right? It's a full movement driveway currently. So I'm thinking of just north of here in Huntersville, we have a place where we were having, I believe NCDOT was observing a left turn, different roadway crash pattern, and installed what's called quick curb to essentially divide the left turn lane so that the only way you could turn out of the adjacent driveways was to the right. People could still make a left into the driveway, but they could only turn right out of the driveway. And it just depends on the crash pattern that we're observing, Arnold, and what you might see, and what might have the best effect. Sometimes you install them with the best of intentions. They are a maintenance nightmare. I will tell you that. They are a maintenance nightmare because people, and especially big trucks, love to just run over them.
Yeah, I was actually, it's funny, I guess the delineator word is a bit general. I was actually thinking of a different type of delineation, but I know which kind you're talking about that kind of rise up. I was thinking of something close to the pavement that gives a visible delineation. We would use that at things like curves, where you have a runoff road crash problem, or what we call lane departure crash problem. So, just like you're saying, Angela, it's going to be based on what's the pattern of crashes, what's happening there. That really drives kind of what type of, whether we would do delineators and what type and that sort of thing.
Thank you both, and thanks for that question. Got another one here. Give me a moment to read through it. Says, as an agency that has several officers that have worked at previous agencies, each seems to have their way of completing the DMV 349. Being that this is the same form used throughout the state, it would seem it should be prepared the same. Issues we often deal with are things like roadway configuration type related to divided, unprotected versus positive median barriers. For example, would you recommend a small concrete median or center lane divider about 4 inches high be labeled a positive barrier, even though vehicles can easily cross, whether intentionally or unintentionally? Not sure, Angela or Daniel, who's best to answer that.
Yeah, I'm not sure either. For me, that would still be a positive median barrier. It's probably a 6 foot or 6 inch curb that was intended to prevent you from crossing that line. Whether they do or don't, I would consider it to be positive median. Honestly, what would happen is when we drill into the data and start pulling data, we'll pull up an aerial and start to look at the intersection. We may conduct a field investigation. Any number of things may result from that piece of information. So I would say that's a great question, and I can understand that, probably every basic law enforcement training teaches the DMV 349 slightly differently, and those officers that teach it bring their own perspective from having done crash reporting for many years in some cases, to how they type things. So roadway configuration type is not typically a field I generally spend a lot of time looking at, if that helps you.
I was going to say something to the similar effect, Angela. If it's a tough call or something like that, I would say it's okay if it's not exactly right. I'll tell you what, if you can get the exact location of the crash, we can take it from there.
Angela and Daniel, thank you both. We've got time for, we got 2 more questions in the queue. Let's see if we can get through both of them before we wrap up. So the next question addressed to Angela. Early in your presentation, you mentioned including a distance of 100 feet from an intersection as geometry included with that intersection. I like that approach. This is the writer. Do you have any examples of how that small change improved your data analysis and data-driven safety improvements? With my focus on locating railroad crashes and railroad crossings being in an intersection, I'm interested in your methodology.
So the 100 feet has been a methodology that our department has used forever, as far as I know. It really has to do with when we are in our crash data warehouse and drawing a polygon around what crashes are we going to include in that analysis. We defaulted to 100 feet. I've been working with our crash data vendor, and they were showing me the warehouse that Utah has, and their default is 250 feet. So I think it really just depends on your agency and what they want to do in terms of a default. So the methodology is one I inherited, unfortunately, so I can't give you a whole lot of history about it.
Yeah, we use 150 feet as our typical intersection influence distance, but to be honest, it's like what you said. It's going to depend on the exact location you're talking about. You know, some of them might have a wider intersection influence than others. For a railway crossing, it may be a different distance is called for. It really depends on kind of what you want to look at in your analysis.
Thank you for that. And last question we'll get in here before we close out. This is actually circling back to the prior question about proper labeling of a I think the example was a 4-inch high median. The comment is we have always labeled those type of structures as an unprotected median due to it not being designed to stop a vehicle as much as a suggestion not to cross. Is this correct?
Again, I'm just going to kind of bring it back to don't lose sleep on this one, guys. Get the exact location and both, if it's the city of Charlotte with Angela or NCDOT, we're going to go visit the location. We're going to look at it if it's an issue, and we'll figure out what needs to be done on the roadway.
Daniel, thank you. And Angela, thank you. We're closing in on our 1 hour time, so I will thank everybody for those great questions. I really appreciate the attentiveness and just the detail that you guys have gone into today. But that's all we have time for today. So again, thanks to Daniel and Angela. If you do have some additional questions before we close out the webinar, put them in the Q&A window, and we'll forward those on to Angela and Daniel to get a response to you afterwards. Also, before you leave the meeting today, feel free to use the Q&A window to share any suggestions to help us improve our webinar series, including any future topics you'd like to learn about. Following today's webinar, you'll receive an email from me with the link to the recording as soon as it's online and posted. So watch for this email. In that email will also be a link if you want to receive a participation certificate for this event. So if you wish to receive one, wait to get my email, click on that link and just put in your name and email address, and we'll send a certificate out to you. If you are a professional engineer attending today's webinar, you can earn 1 PDH for participating. There will be a link in that same email to an NC Bell's evaluation form, so be sure to fill that out. Please note that we can only give certificates to attendees of the live webinar. So if you're happening to be watching this now as the recording, we aren't able to give you certificates for recording, but everyone who attended the live webinar is eligible to receive. Just simply click on the link and say, yes, send me a certificate. We invite you to join us again for other traffic safety webinars that we have planned this year for our series this year and into next year. So please visit our website. That's our nzvision0.org/expo-training. That's also nctrafficsafetyconference.org. It's the same website, and we'll have a listing of our upcoming webinars. Our next webinar, I believe, is going to be in February after the holidays. On the same website, you'll find information about the North Carolina Traffic Safety Conference and Expo. We just had it this year in 2022. We will not be having a conference in 2023. Our next conference will be in April of 2024. So keep a watch on the website for information about the next conference, and we certainly hope you'll plan to attend the next conference. So thank you again for participating in today's webinar, and with that, goodbye for now.